Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to build out our register screen for our full stack blog application. Just to take a look at what we'll be building, here's the view of the register page. We just have a simple H2 or a simple header that says register, the words join us, and the main things are having the email, username, and password listed here. Once the user types in this information, they'll click the register button and then they'll be redirected to the login page. So we're going to make the register page and login page today. We're not going to build out the login just yet, but we are going to build out the register. So before we build out our register window, I just want to do a couple quick updates. First, inside of our next.config.js file, let's go ahead and add in the experimental information that needs to be keyed in here. We shouldn't still have to do this now that the Next app is stable, but let's just go ahead and add it in just to make sure we don't run into any issues. It's inside of our lib folder. If we click on the database.js file, make sure that you have your Mongodb underscore URL as the variable. In a prior video, I recall calling out this update, but as you're building out your application, if you're following along in the series and don't have this exact URL listed here, you will get an error. This is the same variable that's listed inside of our .env file. So whatever you have inside of your .env file as your variable, just make sure it matches this, otherwise you get an error. So with that said, we can go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we want to do in building out our application is we want to create two new pages. With Nextjs, in order to build out those pages, we'll need to navigate inside of the app directory, and we'll need to create two folders. The first folder is going to be register, and inside of the app directory, the second folder that we want to create is login. So these are going to represent the actual routes, our login and our register route. So let's just make sure that everything is working properly from a routing perspective. So inside of the login folder, let's add a file, named page.js. And inside of the register folder, let's add a file named page.js. And for both of these files, let's just add in a regular component just to make sure that everything is working properly. So I'm going to use the RFCE shortcut for React, and I'm going to remove the page and I'm going to replace it with register and just click save. I'm going to do the same thing for the page.js file inside of the login folder, and I'll remove the page and I'll replace it with login. So if we go ahead and save our window, make sure we save both. And if we navigate back to our localhost 3000, and if we click on the login button, and we see we have it listed right here as login, and if we click on register, we see that it takes us to the register screen, and we can see that here within the local host that it is routing to the correct window. So now that we have our login and register route set up, let's focus on the register route. So close out the page.js that's associated or that's inside of the login folder, and let's just focus on the page.js that's inside of the register folder. So the first thing we want to do, let's go ahead and add in the use client within our file just to make sure we don't forget it and we don't get any errors. Let's go ahead and bring in use state, as we're going to use this to help manage the state of our username, email, and password. After use state, let's go ahead and bring in sign in from Next-auth. This is what's going to allow us to sign in or register within this window. And then last but not least, we'll go ahead and bring in React Toast. We're not going to use it right now, but I'll go ahead and add it into our code so that it's already set up. And then once we have the login and the register pages configured, then we'll go back and add in those toast notifications. So inside of the register component, the use state hook is used to define and initialize the state variables. Like I said, the main ones that we're going to focus on in this window is the username, email, and password. Next, we're going to create a handle submit function that is defined to handle the form submission. This asynchronous function is going to be triggered when the form is submitted. We want to make sure that we permit the default behavior. Next, we're going to add in a little bit of validation. The first validation is going to be if the username or email or password is blank, we want to return an error, a toast notification saying that, hey, all fields are required or all fields need to be filled in. Next thing we want to confirm is that if the password is less than 6 characters, we want to make sure that we are sending a notification back to the user that The password needs to be more than 6 characters. After that, let's create a try catch block. First, we'll need to create a variable named res, and you can name it whatever you want. That's going to interact with the register API that we created earlier. We're going to make a post request to the localhost 3000/API/register, which is the endpoint that we created in the first video. This endpoint has the username, the email, and password. Anytime that we use the fetch function, we need to make sure that we're returning the headers, and headers content type is always going to be application.json. Method is going to be post, and that we're going to stringify the JSON data that we get back. And just to make sure for good measures, we'll do a console.log just to make sure that we're getting that information in the console as a means of troubleshooting. And if the status is okay, we want to send a notification back to the user that they are fully registered. We'll give it a little bit of time to make that connection, and if it doesn't work, then it'll send something back to the user. And in our else statement, we're going to send a notification to the user that there was an error while registering. So let's make sure that we save our file and take a look at our code. And everything seems to look good from here. So with the functionality of the register process built, let's go ahead and take care of the user interface. First thing I want to do is remove these divs and replace it with the section. And inside of the section, let's add a class name. And I'm just going to add some styling here within our return section. And I'm going to add register just so you can see the difference here. But basically what this is it's just setting the background to gray, setting the screen size to max width small so that it's closer in or that it's more contained. Setting the margin to auto so that it shifts from the left to the middle. We want to set this to flex, and we want to give it a flex directional column. Center the items on the y-axis, and we want the edges to be rounded medium to be consistent with the buttons. So if we save our file, here's what we should see. Then a H1 to hold our register header. So I'll just go ahead and type in a H1 here. And we'll give this a class name for some styling. We're going to give it a little bit of margin bottom. We want the width to be full. This is going to be a larger text, so we'll make it 4XL. The font is going to be light. We want it to be centered. The text color to be gray, uppercase, and on small screens, we want the text to be 5XL. So let's go ahead and save our editor and go back to our local host. And we see we have our register header here. Let's add in the div that's going to hold our form and join us header underneath our register header. So in this div, let's add a class name. We want to set the styling to flex column. We want the width to be full, which is just going to be full of this container. We're going to give a little bit of padding, set the background to white. We want the corners to be rounded medium, and we're going to give it a little bit of shadow as well. So now within this div, let's add one more div and let's give it a class name. We want the text to be centered. We're going to have this text to be a little smaller than the other. The font will be light. We'll set the color, and on small screens, we want the text to be a different size than what it is on larger screens. So we'll type in join us right here and click save. If we go back to our localhost 3000, here's what we see. So now under this div, this will be the div that holds our form. So we'll create one more div and we'll add a class name, and we're just going to give it a margin top of. That way we have a little bit of margin between the join us and the actual form. Now we'll want to create our form. Inside of our form, we want to add the on submit. And what it will be submitting is the handle submit function that we created. Within the form tag is where we want to have the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the functionality. So I'm going to copy and paste some information in here. So first we have a div, and we're giving it a little bit of margin, and we want it to be set to flex. So we'll add in one more div. And then inside of our input, we want to set the type to email, because this input is going to be for the email. So what you see in the class name is really just personal preference for styling. If you'd like for me to go over this, let me know, and I'll be happy to do so when I create the login screen. Otherwise, feel free to copy this and make changes as you see fit. And for me, I added in a placeholder because I'm not a big fan of the labels. I'd rather just have a placeholder. But just so you can see what this looks like, I'll go ahead and save the screen. And if we go back to our localhost 3000, we see that we have the email input here, and this is what the styling looks like. Once we click it, we get a nice little purple hover right here, letting you know that this is the one that's created. And I just rounded this corner and didn't want to round this one. This is just personal preference. Feel free to make it however you like. What's important from this input is this onChange handler here. This onChange handler is capturing the user input or the value that's submitted in the email field. The next column that we want to create is for our username. And we basically have the same styling just so that you can see what it looks like. You really could just copy and paste it over. Just change this placeholder from your email to your username. And right here, make sure that you change the set email to set username on this onChange method. And then the last column that we'll need to create is for our password. Here you want to make sure that you have the type set to password. And you don't necessarily have to have this ID. I was looking to use a different method to submit to the database, but I landed on this one, so sorry that I kept that here. But basically you want to make sure you have this type set to password. That way it is asterisked out while the user is keying it in. And the other main thing you want to do is make sure that this set username, if you did copy and paste it, or set email, whichever one you copied, make sure you change it to set password. So the last thing we'll need to include is the register button. And within this div, I wanted it to take up the full width of the container. That way the register button is the same length of the inputs. If we hit save, we'll see that we now have our register window created. And the only thing I want to add here is just a little indicator that if you already have an account with us, you can click this link and it'll take you to the login screen. So underneath our form and underneath this initial div that is above our form, let's add in another div and let's give it a class name of flex. The items are centered. We're going to give it a little bit of margin top, and we'll use a tag here versus the link. You really could have used either one. Just make sure that the href is set to login. We'll need to add the target is set to blank. And here's a little bit of styling for the span that we created right here. Already have an account with us, you'll click login. We see that we have the link listed here asking if the user already has an account. So we have all of our styling in place. We should be able to register a user. Let's go ahead and register our first user just to see what we get. So I'll add in the jaadad@gmail.com. We'll do the jaadad as my username. And I'll set a password. Now, once I click register, if everything works as designed, I should be redirected to the login screen. And it looks like everything works successfully because we're now on the login screen. So just to confirm that it works successfully, if you go to your MongoDB Atlas and click on Browse Collections, you should see the user that you just registered within this window. And that should let you know that everything is working successfully. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, feel free to give it a like and consider subscribing. Next, we'll create our login page, and I'll see you in the next video.